Morning. We start now. Marty's here, so once Marty's here, we can fire away. Great to see you this morning. Anybody like to share anything since I've seen you last? Since we've been together last, which was a week ago. Everybody doing good? Yeah. I'm glad you're here. Hope you're enjoying this particular series. We haven't actually got to the crux of what wisdom is. As in its applicable understanding, but I'm trying to help you define what the Bible talks about wisdom. There are different perceptions and understandings of what, or conceptions of what we think is wisdom. I've got to bring it to the biblical one, so that you grasp it and get it, and then we can lean into it. So this is our 10th week on this particular study on wisdom. We talked and launched out back weeks ago in Job 28, where Job asked the question, where can you find wisdom? And he came to the conclusion that the wisdom we're wanting to talk about, you just can't find it anywhere. You just can't find it hither or thither, or go to a certain place geographically or whatever. It's actually only God has it. God's the one who gives it. So you got to go to God for it. So we've been differentiating that reality that God is the one with the wisdom we're looking for. It's the type of wisdom that we read here in Proverbs. Happy is the man that finds this level of wisdom, God's wisdom, and who gets the understanding. For the merchandise, the profit, the benefit, the byproducts of finding wisdom is better than the merchandise of silver, and the gain thereof than fine gold. It is the most profitable thing you can acquire. Man goes to all extremes, Job said, to find items of value. And yet, Job said, there's nothing like wisdom. Wisdom is by far the most valuable thing you can get. Because all of these other things you could want, wisdom can give them to you. But all the other things that you would want don't give you wisdom. And that's what happens in the world. We pursue the things, but they don't give us wisdom. They're not a guarantee of wisdom. But going to God and getting wisdom is a guarantee of all the things you could ever want. So he says here, you're a happy man if you find it. He says in verse 15, she, speaking again of this passion or relational desire, is more precious than rubies, and all things that you can desire are not to be compared unto her. So she's valuable. You got to get a hold of her. And when you do, it says length of days are in her right hand, which is the predominant hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor, or prosperity, or promotion, advancement, success. And her ways are plenteous, and her ways are pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She's a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her, and happy is everyone that retaineth her. Boy, I'd love to have a tree that's producing all the time. And that's really what he's saying. She produces all the time. You know, many's the time my mom used to say to us, you think money grows in trees? And I'd often think, boy, imagine if you had a tree that produced money all the time. I mean, how awesome would that be? But here's the thing about wisdom. She's a fruit-producing tree. And you lay hold of it, and you have one of them planted in your life, and I'm telling you, it just keeps producing the goods again and again and again. So she's to be desired. It's to be the pursuit of what you look for or what you desire. And again, you're a happy man if you find wisdom. It goes on here and says this, then, as we took up the elements of wisdom. There were three elements: knowledge, understanding, and of course, wisdom itself. And it says here, when we took this up, knowledge, it's the knowledge of God. It's not just academic knowledge, it's knowledge of God. This is where we go for wisdom. Knowledge of God, his nature, character, and will that are found in the Word of God. That's where you go for it. Knowledge of God. And you learn about his character and all of the nature and the attributes of God. Understanding, it comes when the principles in the Word are rightly interpreted, correctly comprehended, and its instructions are easily encompassed. So again, this wisdom that we're after, this tree that we want that keeps producing, keeps churning out the goods, left hand, right hand, all of the benefits you could possibly want, but the things you could want don't give you wisdom, but wisdom gives you those things. If you find the knowledge of it and get the understanding of how it works, then you can apply it to your life. So you got to go to the Word for it, number one. Secondly, we brought up this whole thing about understanding. It's not a matter of saying, I got it, I got it. It requires deep thinking. It is not a casual thought. It is something you have to think deeply about. And we talked about meditating, regurgitating concepts and principles and laws and applying them to your life. And it takes time. There's a process to it. You don't learn it immediately. It's developed, and process allows you to do that. Many times you find yourself in a situation or in a circumstance that you're rebuking all the time. And yet the reality of it is God's allowed something to flow through or your life, flow into your life that is for the purpose of developing or applying the understanding of what the Word says. And many times as soon as it shows up, well, it's of the devil and I rebuke it. Well, maybe you should just take what you've learned from the Word of God and start applying it and watch what happens and start developing it. But automatically when something is not nice or something is uneasy or uncomfortable or unfamiliar, we automatically want to blame the devil, and we automatically then rebuke it and we refuse to go through it because it's not God. Well, sometimes it is. And there is no temptation. Actually, somebody go to 2 Corinthians chapter 10 if you would. Sometimes just the application of understanding is just necessary. You won't get it without a test. You have to have a test. And many times we refuse to take them. We rebuke them. We ask 4 or 5 people to agree with us that it won't happen. So, and let's agree that I won't have to take my exams, and I'll still get a degree. It doesn't work that way. Somebody want to read verse 13.
We will not boast about things done outside our area of authority. We will boast only about what has happened within the boundaries of the work God has given us, which includes
My fault.
2 Corinthians 10.
Yeah, that was me. It was 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. I'm sorry. And the point I'm trying to make here is, I'm sorry, John, that was my fault. There is process to it, and God takes you through process. You've got to apply. You've got to go to the Word, find out what the Word says. Then you've got to deep think it so you get the understanding of what it's and how it works. And then you get the process of exercising it. Somebody read verse 13 for me.
1 Corinthians 13. The temptations in your life are no different from what other experience. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than what you can stand. When you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you can endure. So, my dear friends, flee from the worship of idols. You are reasonable people. Decide for yourselves if what I am saying is true.
Okay.
When we bless the
No, leave it there, John. And so what he's basically saying here is, look, there is no temptation that isn't common to man, but God won't allow that temptation happen to you unless He knows that you have the ability to come out from under it. That's basically what he's saying. He wouldn't let it happen. No more than you would let your child go through something that they haven't been trained for or haven't the experience to come out from under. And that's what he's saying. God, if God allows it to happen to you, in that something crops up in your life, just stop rebuking it and realize that there's a process to understanding. And there's some things you got to go through. But the key to it is go through. The psalmist said in Psalm 23, even though I go through the valley of the shadow of death. But the key to that whole verse is you go through. He didn't say you stay there, you camp there. He says you go through there. But there's something to learn in the process. And so, as I said, a lot of times we don't want to go to the gym, but we want the results. You know, we don't want to take the exam, but we want the degree. It doesn't work that way. Well, we want to become mature, strong believers, but we don't want any tests or trials. Sorry, comes with the process. It's part of the process. But here's the deal. If you find yourself in something, going through something that is not of your own seeding, then you just got to believe that God has faith in you. God believes that you have what it takes to come through this. You have the knowledge and the understanding to apply to come out from under this, victorious. And so many a time when you find yourself up to your eyeballs in something and you think, what do I do? Then you stop for a minute and grab that regurgitated deep thinking of the processes or the information that you got from the Word of God, and you start to apply it. And then watch what happens. And you'll come out from under it, you'll gain a victory, you'll advance, and you know what? The devil will not be able to beat your brains out with that one anymore, because you've learned how to beat it. You've learned how to come out from under it. And so that's what understanding is. And so again, it's applicable. You've got to deep think it, and then you've got to go through the process of applying it to your life. And as you do, you begin to realize what's going on, and when it shows up the next time, wisdom will take over, because you know what the Word says, you know, understand how the Word works, and then you'll start applying it intentionally right from the get-go. Not because you were desperate and you didn't know where to turn, and eventually you learned the hard way. Now you live life by principles. I know what this is, I know how it works, and I know how to be wise. Everybody with me? All right. Wisdom is where we're going today. The correct application of knowledge, this is biblical knowledge, and the quality of good, sensible, prudent judgment. That's really what this is going to look like when you get to it. Because the idea of wisdom is distorted in the church, particularly. When we use the word wisdom, we automatically think of many different things other than what we're going to go to in the Word. When we talk about wisdom, you say, boy, I'm going to be really clever, I'm going to be real smart, I'm going to be real intellectually advanced in a lot of fronts. That's the wrong measuring stick. That's not what we're learning. It's not what we're learning. So when we would use the term wisdom, from a worldly perspective, we would normally think this: naturally acquired wisdom, which is the collected account of experiences and observations gathered through years of living. If I was to say, where does wisdom come from? You say, well, I tell you what, it's years of experience and years of observation and gathering that knowledge. That's wisdom. Now, there is something to be said of that. There is something to be said of, been round the block twice, gone round, again and again. You learn some things in life. You learn some things seasonally as seasons go round. You adapt and adopt certain things in your life because of experience and observations. And that's true. But that's not what we're talking about. This is a form of smarts, I suppose, but it's not the wisdom we're talking about. But we call this naturally acquired wisdom, the collected account of experiences and observations gathered through years of living. There's another measuring stick that we would use for wisdom in life, and that's the intellectual acquisition of wisdom through learning and the study of subject matter. And so you study a particular subject or a topic of interest, and you would become very wise concerning those issues, its functionality, its purpose, and so on and so forth. And people would, when they come to that particular field of expertise or that particular field of knowledge, they would perceive you as somebody being very wise. Well, yeah, it's intellectual acquisition. You're smart because you've done the work, you've done the study on a particular topic or a subject. Again, you could be, great at a particular, very wise at a particular issue, and a fool in so many other arenas of your life. The first one there, naturally acquired wisdom. Thing about naturally acquired wisdom is that is all that, I meant to explain this, that is all dependent on how long you live, where you live, and what experiences and observations you have. So in other words, it's limited. Naturally acquired wisdom is limited to the experiences you have or the observations you take in. And you may be wise, because you've been around long enough, but it's not full wisdom because it's quite limited, again, to where you live and the experiences that you have or that you've seen. Intellectual acquisition of wisdom, again, is limited because it is based on a subject, or maybe you're smarter than most and maybe have several degrees in certain subjects, fronts, or fields. But again, it's an acquisition, and then you can still go home and still be a twat when you get in the door. And useless as a husband and useless as a dad, morally, debauch or whatever, but hey, I'm an expert in this. That's not the wisdom we're talking about. Yet many people would measure somebody as wise from an intellectual perspective. Intelligence, smarts. Then there's another measuring stick that we would use for wisdom in the world today, and that's skill, ingenuity, or manual dexterity. So you get somebody who has a skill, maybe not from an intellectual perspective, but certainly gifted with their hands, their talents. And you can, learn a lot of different things, but there are people out there that just have skill sets that are just, they're graced with gifts and abilities that all the intellect in the world just, you can't teach it. It's just, but when it comes to them doing and knowing what to do concerning skills and ingenuity and manual dexterity, they are amazing individuals. And in their front and in their field, they would be considered wise, masters. If you belong to City and Guilds or one of them, they have, master craftsmen. Pardon? Journeymen. Yeah, people that are masters in their craft. As opposed to an apprentice or somebody who just does a bit of this or a bit of that. These are people that have done this phenomenally over time, and they are master craftsmen. They would be considered wise in their field. But again, limited to their field. Doesn't make you smart with finance, doesn't make you smart with health, it doesn't make you smart with relationships. It just doesn't. Is it wise? It's a measuring stick in the world. And then another measuring stick we use is just craftiness, subtlety, and shrewdness without the connotation of either good or evil. Some people are just shrewd, streetwise, perceptive, prudent to a great degree. Just can't pull the wool over their eyes. They may not be intellectually deep in the sense of they don't have to be highly educated to do it. You don't have to have lived long to have it. And you don't have to have any particular skill or manual dexterity. You're just shrewd. You're just crafty. You're subtle. And that would be considered a form of wisdom. All with me? The wisdom of God is all but not one of these. Because as you can see, every one of these are limited. Very few have all of this. And even if you have all of this is still limited. Still with me? So you have several degrees and you have great dexterity and ingenuity and you're shrewd and you've lived long. But you're still limited because you haven't lived long enough to learn everything and to know all things. You're maybe shrewd, but how shrewd? There's so many limits. But the wisdom we're going to talk about of God is it's different. It's just a different level. But as you can see, these are measuring sticks of what we would call wisdom in the world in which we live today. So, Proverbs 16:31 says, "Gray hair is a crown of glory, and it is gained by living a godly life." Or basically what he's trying to say here is that obviously if you've lived long enough to have matured, then obviously you've submitted to certain principles. I mean, you didn't live foolishly. You slept right. You ate right. You maybe exercised. You complied to laws and principles to some degree. Otherwise, you wouldn't be around at 80 or 90 or 100 years of age. All right? If you were a fool at 20 odd and you sowed the wrong seed and lived a wild life, you find that many people just don't make it out of their 20s or 30s living that sort of, at that pace. But if you get to the point where you have gray hairs or whatever, it is a crown of glory in that you have gained living by some godly application or principles that you've adhered to or submitted to. Even whether you were wholly or fully aware of, you would call it just common sense. I looked right and left when I crossed the street. You know, I didn't take selfies on the edge of the building. That sort of, you know, I was smart enough to comply with principles. And so you got there, so you've lived long. And that's a good thing. And you didn't get there because you knew everything, but you did comply with certain principles that got you there. And that's what he's basically saying. If you've lived long, you've obviously done some things right. You may not have done everything right, you've done some things right. But here's what Job said. "Great men are not always wise, neither do aged men understand judgment." So yeah, you may have been around a while and you may have complied with certain principles to get you there, but that's not a guarantee that you understand everything. It's still not the measuring stick of wisdom. Great men are not always wise, neither do aged men understand everything. They don't. We're not smart enough and we don't live long enough.
Going back now, what would be the definition of great men? Who would be a great man?
Well, who would you consider a great man?
And worldly ways, I suppose some politicians, I think CEOs of corporations.
Why would they be considered great?
In worldly things.
Yeah. They would be great maybe because they've achieved or accomplished what others haven't. Or they've pressed beyond boundaries or parameters where others would have stopped and said no further, and they would have had the boldness to take it up another level or think out of the box academically or whatever, corporately, and have done something that others didn't do. Yes, you do. You consider them great. But what he's basically saying is, as great and all as that CEO may be, or as great and all as that entrepreneur may have been, great men are not always wise. They're not always, you may think that in their field, they may look like they have knocked the ball out of the park in that arena. But that's not the guarantee that they're wise, because as I said, they could be fools in so many other arenas of their life.
To me, a dad is a great man, or someone who creates a family successfully. I was just curious as to, what did Job consider a great man?
But a great dad still doesn't make a great dad wise. There are great dads and terrible husbands. And there are great dads and terrible employers and employees. So our greatnesses can be measured in different fields. But what he's trying to point out here is that we have a level or a measure of greatness, but that's no guarantee of wisdom in the world. And you can live a long time, but that doesn't mean that you understand everything. And what he's basically saying is, these are standards that we hold up in life as wise. And what the Word is telling us is, well, you know what? In the world's concept of wisdom, it has applicable acknowledgement because they've lived longer than most, or they've done things greater than others. They're great. And he's saying, not really. They've done great things and they've lived a long time, But wisdom, that's not wisdom. Wisdom is a different thing. They've done. If you can do this without God, if you can be a great man and do it without God, then obviously we're not talking about godly wisdom, because it's wisdom that they got from their own smarts or shrewdness or dexterity or intellectual achievement. Are you still with me? I'm trying to draw the difference. There's a level of wisdom that we're looking for, and it's not found, as he said in Job, it's not found in the land of the living. It's better than that. It's greater than that. And yet greatness here would produce a prosperity and honor and promotion, and age here would be longevity. This is right hand, left hand stuff. This is all right hand, left hand stuff. You can have right hand, left hand stuff, but that doesn't mean you're wise. You can have right hand, left hand stuff, but that doesn't mean you're wise. You may be a great man and you may have lived long, but that doesn't automatically apply that you're wise, is what we're getting at. Watch what it says here. There is a wisdom that belongs to the aged and understanding to the old. Of course, if you've lived long enough, experience over time. You know, you're going to be wiser than some young guy. You're going to be wiser than your kids, because you've been there. It's only later on in life, when your kids get older, that they realize mom and dad were right. Many times have we thought that they were wrong. You're old, fuddy-duddy, you don't understand. No, they do understand, you just are too immature. But many times later on, you discover how wise and true they were. So there is a wisdom, and I wrote up there in the heading, there are two types of wisdom. Watch what he says here. Wisdom belongs to the aged, and understanding to the old. Of course it does. They have that benefit. But true wisdom, now he's drawing a definition. He's saying, yes, there's a level of wisdom there with years and an understanding with time, but he said, but true wisdom. In other words, what they gain isn't really true wisdom. It is our wisdom, but it's not true wisdom. It's not what we're talking about. True wisdom and power are found in God. Counsel and understanding are his. So now he's drawing a difference. Now he's drawing a line in the sand and saying, listen, I appreciate you've gained knowledge over time, experience over time. You're intellectually very smart. You're very intelligent. You're very skillful. Your dexterity is incredible. You're crafty. You're shrewd. You're streetwise. And there's all different levels of this thing in the world. But he says true wisdom and power is only found in God. So there's a different type of wisdom. And it doesn't come from those other arenas, although they have levels of what the world measure as wisdom. So what we're looking for is not those things. Still with me? Okay. Oh, how I love your law. This is this knowledge and then understanding. Oh, how I love the word. It is my deep thinking all day. Thou, through your words, have made me wiser than my enemies. Well, now there's circumstance and situation. There's something that you can, as we said, natural acquisition of experiences over time and observations. But this is a wisdom that your enemy isn't the one who trains you. Experience isn't the one that necessarily trains you. You didn't learn it by failing a million times. You with me? You didn't have to go try it 50 times and get it wrong to get it right. Am I losing some of you there? He said, there's a wisdom that my enemies haven't taught me. In other words, I didn't need opposition to train me in this one. When it arose, I was able to deal with it. I knew it before it came. I had the answer before the problem arose. I had the skill set developed before the issue came at me. I already had it. I knew exactly what to do when it came. They didn't teach me. The circumstance didn't teach me. The observation didn't teach me. I knew what to do when it came. Whereas other people, Natural wisdom is acquired by observation, experience, failing, getting it right, failing, getting up, failing, and then getting it right. He said, no, there's a wisdom, the psalmist says here. I love your law. It's my deep thinking, my meditation. And through your laws, or the word, you've made me wiser than my opposition before it even comes, or my experience before it ever happens. For they are ever with me. I have more understanding than all my teachers. So what? Hold on a second. This is intellectual. These are the teachers. Yeah, I'm actually smarter than they are. I may not know the subject that they know to the detail they know it, but I'm actually wiser than they are. So I have a great professor. He could be a klux. And you are a lot wiser. And they're limited in what they know, and so on and so forth. And so you actually are sitting there listening to their instruction, but you are a wiser individual than the teacher that's teaching you. Well, it's bigger than intellectual. He says, I have more understanding than all my teachers, and your words, or the word, are my deep thinking. This is why. He goes on to say, I understand more than the people that have lived longer than me. The ones that we would have looked at and said, oh, you know, he's been around the block a long time and seen a lot of things, experienced a lot of things, got that white hair, and it's a crown of glory, and obviously they did some things right, and they're great people. You say, you know what, I understand life more than they do. How can you do that? How can you be smarter than your enemy? How can you be wiser than your teacher? How can you know and understand more things than people that have lived longer than you? How can you do that? How can you acquire such understanding? How can you acquire such knowing? And how could you acquire such applicable ability at a young age that makes you more perceptive, more aware, more capable than others that we would look to and think, well, they should be the wise ones. He said, I'm smarter than my teacher. Some of your kids are going to leave high school and go into university, and you certainly want to put the word in, because that word and these concepts and principles will make them smarter than the guys that are standing, or the girls that are standing in front of them trying to teach them stuff. Sir?
This makes me think of Jesus in the temple, right? When Mary just left, and he's there, and they go and find him in the temple, and he's teaching the scribes and the
12 years of age.
Like, how does he know all this? He's
12 years of age. Where cometh this wisdom, Mark 6 says. Go to Mark 6. Whence cometh this wisdom? Where did this wisdom come from? Where did he get it at 12? I think it's Mark 6, 1 and 2, I think. Is it? No? No. In Mark 6, somebody? It's just, let me see. Yeah, I was right. I'll read it. And when he was come out from thence, he came into his own country, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath day was come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished, saying, From whence had this man these things? And what wisdom is this which is given unto him, that even such mighty works are wrought by his hands? I think you were thinking I was referring back to that. Sorry about that. No, I was just thinking about him when he was teaching. Yes, he did it. That's right. When he was 12, he was sitting with the doctors of the law, asking and answering questions. How do you know this? You're only 12. Here, they're looking at him saying, he's just a carpenter's kid. Where did he get this wisdom, and then demonstrate this wisdom in such mighty works? And so what I'm trying to get you to see is that what we're going to discuss and look at is different than something you're going to look for intellectually or something that you're going to acquire through years of experience or observation, or something that is just craftiness or shrewdness or prudence in a worldly sense, or some skill set that you've developed and made you maybe better than others at that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something that makes you understand, know, and become wiser than the teachers and than the aged and than experience in life can teach you. You can learn it before it ever happens. You can know it before you've ever experienced it. Are you still with me? All right. He says, and my speech and my preaching, Paul says, was not with enticing words of man's wisdom. Paul's going to start drawing the comparison. He says, when I came and spoke to you, my preaching was not with enticing words. I wasn't intellectually trying to win you. I wasn't trying to lead you to Christ because I was argumentatively smarter than you. What do we call that debating when people get up and all the university kids get up and say, well, I don't agree, and then you stand there and it's more than a debate, it's a skill set we call. No. I'm actually trying to find the word myself here, but it's when you meet a minister who would debate thank you so much. Apologetics. There you go. Where you would come in and argue, with the people who want to argue against you to argue for. And when you get into apologetics, you really need to be smart. You need to be quick off the mark, and you need to have your arguments and your process of argumentation in line. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself on the losing end of somebody else who can articulate better than you. So your articulation has to be real smart, and you've got to be able to pull concepts together real quickly. So you get people, and their skill set is apologetics. Paul said, I didn't come in and do that with you. That's not the way I won you. For my speech and my preaching was not with enticing apologetics. Words of man's wisdom. He draws the difference here. In the demonstration of the Spirit and of power. He goes to a different arena for his proof. That your faith should not stand in the wisdom of man, but in the power of God. He draws the comparison. Howbeit, we speak wisdom among them that are mature. Yet it's not the wisdom of the world, nor of the princes of the world, that comes to nothing eventually. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, a mysterion. I'll explain that again another time. A mystery is, the word mysterion means, it's when you belong to a fraternity or a group, and you're the only one who knows the language of that group. You have to be in the group to understand the secret. If you're in the group, if you're in the fraternity, you know what the little signs are. If you're in the Freemasons, you know what the little handshakes are. You know your little, and he says here, we're speaking a wisdom that only people in the Word understand. They know where I'm coming from. So, but what he's saying here is, I'm not leaning on man's wisdom or the wisdom of man or the wisdom of the world, he says again and again. But I'm actually dealing out of another arena. I'm dealing out of the wisdom of God. He draws the difference. Notice what he says. I highlighted them for you. I'm not using the words, using man's wisdom to do this. I'm not using the wisdom of man as men would perceive it, conceive it, and apply it. I'm not using the wisdom of this world. I'm using a wisdom from a different plateau. It's different. In 1 Corinthians 1:18, for the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolish, but unto us who are in the fraternity It's the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. And there's all these other forms of wisdom we talked about earlier. I've lived long enough. I've got experience. I've been through. I brought this company to this place. I know how it works. I know how to do it. No. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. I'll bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Now, there's nothing wrong with intellectualism. There's nothing wrong with knowledge. There's nothing wrong with ingenuity and dexterity. There's nothing wrong with shrewdness and craftiness. There's nothing wrong with those things. They're man's best attempt at wisdom without God. They're man's best attempt to be smart enough in this thing called life to give him the advantage in life. They're man's best attempt under sin consciousness to make the best of life. Does that make sense? So I'm not knocking any of them. There's nothing wrong with degrees. There's nothing wrong with going to school. There's nothing wrong with honing your graces and talents and gifts. It's nothing to be laughed at. It's nothing to be to diminish in any way, shape, or form. It's something that we should do for sure. Should get all the knowledge we can in any front or whatever your grace or passions lead you to. Absolutely. We're not knocking shrewdness and craftiness of life. We're not knocking dexterity, ingenuity. We're not knocking those things. But please understand that they are man's best attempt to give him the advantage in life. Does that make sense? So we would call anyone who has them wiser than most and have a better opportunity to do life better than most, because those skill sets help multiply what's in the right hand and the left hand. Long life, prosperity, and promotion. Are you still with me? So without God, those other things are man's best attempt under sin consciousness to excel in the world, in the pursuit of what wisdom actually holds in her right hand and left hand. But if you would get wisdom, if you get her and get the relationship, she has all of those other things that everybody in the world are out there trying to get an advantage in life to gain. She already has them. And if we would pursue her and get a hold of her, the byproduct of having a relationship with her are the things that everybody in the world are trying to get by the advantages of what we call worldly wisdom or the wisdom of men. Did that make sense? Okay. The preaching of the cross is foolishness to them but to us who are in the fraternity, speaking the mysteries of the wisdom of God, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, I will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the teacher? Where is the disputer? Well, what's the word we discovered this morning? Apologetics. All right? Where is the disputer? That's what he's talking about. Where is the one that will get up and argue the point of the world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by its level of wisdom knew not God. And it pleased God by the foolishness of the preaching to save them that believe. For the Jew require a sign, and the Greek seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. On to the Jew, that's a stumbling block. On to the Greeks, well, that just doesn't have enough smarts. But on to them which are called, both Jew and Greek, Christ, the power of God, well, there's a wisdom that most people don't get. and yet it is wisdom. It has everything you can possibly want. God put all this wisdom that he has, he locked it up for us in Christ Jesus. We have access to God's wisdom in Christ. It's how we lay hold, it's how we get a hold of it. Go to Colossians chapter 2. Would somebody read verse 2 and 3? 2, 3, and 4 even.
That their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love, and attain to all riches of the fullness, of the full assurance of understanding, to the knowledge of the mystery of God, both of the Father and of Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge.
In whom are hidden what?
Treasures.
All the treasure, not some. In whom are hidden. He's talking about Christ. In whom are hidden all the treasures of. Go ahead, Barry. Just read that for me again. That's that third verse.
In whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Now this I say, lest anyone should deceive you with persuasive words.
All right. What he's basically saying is, our go-to for wisdom is Christ. God has made him our access now to a full understanding of wisdom. We get our wisdom now in Christ, who is the Word of God, who is the author and finisher of faith. That's where we go. We, when we're there, can get into a level of knowing that the people in the world just can't get. They think they're smart, but they were so smart to the point, as it says there in verse 21, that after that in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. They thought they were smart, but they weren't that smart. They got so intelligent, they thought that man was the center of everything, and they didn't need God. Go to Romans chapter 1, if you would, and somebody read verse 20 and 21. Man, in his own wisdom, starts to think he's so smart, so experienced, so learned, so taught, that he thinks he knows everything he needs to know. And I'm trying to show you that it's limited. That level of wisdom is limited. It always has been. Although the world highly esteem it, God says it's foolishness. Somebody read 20, 21.
For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power in Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened.
Well, what did they start to worship then? Are you all with the narrative there?
Pardon?
All with that narrative? You all understand that? You can nod your head or say no, but just looking at your phone or whatever does not answer my question. Are you with that? You're not with the narrative? All right, let me explain it. He said, God has made himself available to all men, and every man has within him hardwired a knowing that God is. God has put that in there. So man is without excuse. All you've got to do is look up and see the stars, and he realizes somebody made it. All he's got to do is look at the sun coming up in the east and going down in the west and realize, we didn't do that. We're not smart enough. Science hasn't come up with how that works just yet. We observe what's going on, but we haven't the power to make it happen or change it from happening. So there is something beyond our smarts, something beyond our awarenesses that we don't know. But we're ever so clever. In verse 21, he says, you know, I hardwired you with a knowing of me, but you thought you were so smart, you got so full of you, that you thought, you know what, I don't need God. I have it all worked out. I know, 25 billion years ago, there was a blob. And the blob was one single cell, one nebula. And that waffle, guessing, just intellectual foolishness. And we call it history, we call it archaeology, we call it science, and we draw up this narrative to make us look smart. He says, you got so smart you thought you didn't need me, and then after you thought you didn't need me, in your smartness, you start to worship the things that I made. Well, that's clever. If you read the next verse, somebody read the next one. Then God gave them over.
23?
Just read.
Change the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like the corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Reminds me of the man who was cooking his meal and had some wood left over and carved it into idols.
Now, he's not reading that, by the way. He's quoting from his understanding of another narrative in the book of Isaiah, and also one in Jeremiah, where they talk about people cutting down a tree and cooking their meal with the wood from that tree, and with the remainder of the stump they carve an idol, and then they kneel down in front of that idol and they worship it, and they offer stuff to the idol. And the writer says in Isaiah, why would you pray to a tree that couldn't deliver the other half of itself that made your dinner, and now you cut it down and burned it and you cooked your meal, and then the other half of it you're asking to change your life. And he says, how stupid is that? And that's how stupid we are. And as Bernard read, they give themselves over to worshiping creatures and save the planet and live for the trees and save the whales. And we have to be good stewards of our planet, so don't get me wrong, but my goodness, stop living for the planet. And that's what we've done. We're so smart now. We have it all. It's all global warming. This is what's going to happen, and you haven't a clue. You haven't been around long enough. We haven't been on the planet long enough to understand how it fully works. But isn't it obvious that because we're limited in the fact that we are not here long enough, that there was somebody did all this and made it all happen, but we're so wise that we're foolish. And then if you read on, you don't have to go into debauchery, and then they start changing their sex, then they start changing their passions, then they start changing all of their other stuff, and then they all sit there thinking, boy, we're ever so clever, and God's saying, no, you're not. No, you're not. It's not wise at all.
What's old is new again.
Pardon?
What's old is new again.
What
is old is new again.
Oh, yeah, because people haven't lived long enough. And so one generation forgets very easy, and they go back and it repeats itself again because they haven't learned anything. You all still with me? I'm trying to show you that the scriptures clearly divide between what the world called wisdom, and the wisdom the world have is the pursuit of longevity and prosperity. That's what we call wise. If you have a great degree or several degrees, you should live better, have more than others who don't, because you are wiser. Or if you've become a great man or a great leader or a great whatever, you should have a greater life than somebody who's not as great or as you, because you'll have a longer life and a better life and have more things and more availability. So you know, that's for the great. That's for the educated. That's for the talented. That's for all of these people. If you're in those categories, you should have life better than anybody else because you're wise. God says, no, I've got a wisdom for everybody. I don't care if you never went to school. You can still be wise. You can still achieve. You can still fulfill purpose and potential and do all the things that you were meant to do, because my wisdom was always for you to prosper and be in health and enjoy all those benefits. But we have, under sin consciousness because of Adam, we have thought that the way to make it in life is through these other arenas that we call wisdom, and the reality of it is God calls them foolish because they're all limited. But we have determined certain people in the world who have these standards should have a better life than other people who don't have those standards. And we justify it. And the pursuit of it is, our wisdom is in the pursuit of long life and prosperity and promotion. Can you see it? Can you see what we're talking about?
It starts with, we have to accept the mystery.
Say what?
We have to accept the mystery. We've talked about the first scripture that you...
Yeah, but you've made it now more mysterious by saying that. So Vernon knows the mystery. Oh, I wonder what Vernon knows that we don't know. No, you should, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with what you said, but the way you said it made it more mysterious, and we
live in a world where we want to quantify tangible things.
yes, we need to now start understanding that there's a level of wisdom that is easy to access, very easy, and is smarter than you give it credit, because it's not got the way the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of men get it. It's not measured like that. It's measured differently. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men, you see your calling, brethren, how not many wise men after the flesh, notice, or nor mighty, nor many noble are called. It's not that they can't be. He's just trying to draw a comparison here. We would promote these individuals and say they're the candidates, and God says, no, they're not the candidates. It's not my standard. But God had chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. God had chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things that are mighty, and the baser things of the world, and the things that are despised hath God chosen, yea, and the things which are not, to bring to naught things that are. Or he's not saying that, that he picks the despised. He's just saying God can take things that you don't expect, that you don't measure as qualified, and God says, I can qualify them. I can qualify them as wise. Just because they don't meet your standard doesn't mean they're foolish, or they're not strong, or they're not mighty, or they're not capable, or they're not achieving. He says, I have a level of wisdom that is for everybody. And if you can embrace it, it'll give you everything that's in the right hand and the left hand without the world's standard of how you have to get it. Still with me? Any questions? This is a pivotal change, is what I'm trying to get your thinking to go over here. Let no man deceive himself. If any among you seem to be wise in this world, let him be a fool, that he may be wise. In other words, I know most people out there think coming to this sort of a class and whatever. I mean, now if Bill Gates was giving a lecture in the hall next door on how to make money, and it was $5,000 for the hour, and I'm in here teaching here, number one, there'll be a lot more people in there, guaranteed. And some of you might be there too, because you can't afford to miss the hour. Can't afford to miss it, because he is a billionaire. He has it. I'm not disagreeing. He has a level of success. The reality of it is, for all the hundreds of people that'll sit in there, they'll probably never get there either. They probably won't get it. Because, a lot of times it's being in the right place at the right time, and a lot of times you got to chuck and jive too to get where you need to go in this world. We're going to see that in a minute. God says, I can get you what you need without having to chuck and jive. You know what I mean by chuck and jive? Yeah. All right? You don't have to play a game. You don't have to comply with the rules. You don't have to shake the right hands and meet the right people and compromise your morals or values. You don't have to do that to get there. Oh, they might come out with 10 easy points and say, this is how I got there. You know yourself in this world they're chucking and jiving. You know in this world that nobody gets there, you know, as simple as, it's a slippery slope. You got to climb on top of some people, and it depends on how much you want to get there. Sometimes you're there. Exactly. But that's what I'm saying. So you get somebody, and like a Bill, and I'm not picking on him, but I'm just trying to pick on somebody that's extremely successful in an arena. And people would think, well, that's where I got to go to get it. God's saying, no. If you want to be wise in this world, then become a fool. Because most people would think, well, this is foolish. And yet, this is what's going to really make you wise. You still with me? And it's only $4,000 an hour. All right? So it says here, let no man deceive himself. If any man seemeth to be wise in the world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they're all vain. Therefore, let no man glory in men, because truly all things are yours. God's already given you access to everything you need. And I'll finish with this. For our rejoicing is this, the testimony of our conscience, that in simplicity and godly sincerity, not with fleshly wisdom, but with the grace of God, we have had our conversation in the world and more abundantly toward you. Paul's saying here, you know what, guys? What you see, what you've heard, what you've observed in me and through me, he said, it's coming from a completely different arena of wisdom. And I've learned not to go into this wisdom of men or the wisdom of the world. It's limited. What I've done has been from a level of wisdom that most men consider foolish. But when you get a hold of it, it's not foolish at all. It is the power of God to empower your life. You're hardwired for this. You're actually hardwired for it. And through knowledge and deep thinking, God now wants to show you how that works. And it has everything you can want in it. Yes, sir.
Just as a process in this, and like a simple, practical example, I have to make it kind of tangible.
Great.
You know, like my son and I were driving home from one of his baseball games last night, and we're getting ready to go to Alabama for another tournament here in a couple of days. And his comment to me while we were in the car was, you know, my teammates, when we go away, because I was showing them, well, we have a game and then a game, and then it's all this time between the next game. He goes, oh, they're going to do some stupid stuff. And I thought, well, that's wisdom, right? He knows what's going to transpire ahead of time to be thinking. And I think we know that too in our lives, right? Yeah. We know we can associate here, we can go here, we can do that. It's just going to be some stupid stuff. Yeah. And the thought of it is like, it's no big deal, it's just this, or it's just one, or it's just two, or we're just going here, it's no big deal. And that becomes a real slippery slope then when we don't recognize that, right? Absolutely. So that's wisdom.
Yeah, and when we get to the book of Proverbs, because that's where we're going, you're going to call that prudence. Knowing in advance before something ever happens, being smart enough to see it and never show up for it. So you never have to go through it.
It starts with the fear of God.
Yes.
To put God front and center in your life, like I care more about that.
That's correct.
What my peers think, or what's fun, or what these guys are going to do, or whatever. Right?
And so when you go out to business today, when you go out to your company or corporation or your line of trade or whatever it is today, if you put God front and center in your life, God can take you further today than your smarts can. He just can. He can introduce you to people that you don't know of, but he can bring them across your path providentially. God can do amazing things if you'll put him front and center and put that fear of God, take that red pill and press into God like most people don't. And he'll give you all the things that most of the people in the world are busting themselves to get. God says, I can give it to you. But you gotta want the relationship with me before anything else. That's where we're heading. Everybody okay? Any questions? All right. To me, this is a pivotal concept. If you can grasp that, understand that we're all going to go out and do business in the world today for right-hand, left-hand benefit, the reality of it is there's a smarter thing to do, and you'll still get the other two. All right. Somebody want to close us in a word of prayer, and we'll take it up again next week.
Yeah, I'll say that. Dear God, thank you so very much for the bringing a son in our life, and ask that we leave here and that we don't do stupid stuff, and that the wisdom will flow through us, and that we will return here safely, and ask that you show us your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Glory.